Hey everyone, this is Mark, and in this video, I'll be discussing how to create and use a Java method with parameters. In this demonstration, we will be creating a canvas grid that dynamically changes characteristics based on the values the parameters passed in on the method that we're about to create. So by the end of this video, we will have this sort of grid-like lines in our world that can be dynamically manipulated using the parameters that we will use for the method. So to start off, we need to create our method inside of the Turtle Java class. So assuming that everyone already knows the syntax on creating a method, so I'm just going to wave my hands on the syntax so we can focus more on the parameters we're going to be utilizing. So for the first parameter, we're going to be needing the world width, or the width of the world that we're going to create. And for the second one is the height of the world. And for the third one is the grid length, or the amount of grid lines vertically that we want to produce in our world or canvas. So for this one, I passed in 20 grid lines. So it's going to produce 20 vertical grid lines. And the way I coded it, it's going to, for the horizontal grid lines, it's going to adapt on the spacing between each of the vertical lines. So it doesn't matter how many horizontal lines you have. What matters is the spacing between the vertical lines. I'm gonna talk about that later on detail. So then, in order to fill the world canvas with grids, we had to set up all the necessary measurements needed to start coding. Now these are all the variables we're going to be using for the remainder of this video. You can rename these variables yourself however you want, but it's best practice to keep it concise and easy to understand for others so that they can understand as well. It seems like a lot of work, but it's really simple, and the advantage of setting your variables early, it will be easy to change parts of your code all at once, so you won't have to change something manually when you decide to refactor it later in time. Now going over these variables quickly, very briefly, we're going to be needing the max width of our world, also the max height, the min width or the minimum width of the world, and the minimum height, which is one world lower bound, which is the lowermost part of our canvas, the uppermost or upper bound, the left bound right here, the right bound, the rightmost bound, and the range, the X range, is the amount of space that we have between the left and right bound. Same goes for the Y range, the space between we have from the upper bound and the lower bound. And the center, the X center, which is between the leftmost and the rightmost, the center, we can have that by dividing the max width by 2, and same goes to the Y center, just by dividing the max width by 2. And also we're going to be needing the grid spacing, or space between our grid lines. So this is one of the parameters that we're going to be used. As you can see right here, the grid lines is this. If we set 20 right here, divide the X range, or the space on the rightmost, divided by the grid lines, we're going to have the spacing between each of the grid lines. And also we can set the color if we want, and the center grid, which I colored it a little bit darker than the rest of the grid. So now that everything has been set up, we should start creating our grid. So there will be 3 parts to create our grid. It doesn't have to be in this order, but I like to start with the center grid, and then the vertical grid, and finally the horizontal grid. So onto the center grid. So first, I set the color of the center grid to whatever color I'd like. So this one, I'd like it to be a little bit a faint color of gray, but a little bit more stand out than the rest of the grid lines. So you can see the center. And then after that, I use the method pen-up, which stops the turtle from drawing lines or leaving a trail behind. And then I move to the world X center, which is right here, the center of the X axis, and then the world lower bound, which is right here. See, this is really useful. The variables that we set earlier is really useful, so we don't have to remember all the measurements of the world canvas, which takes a lot of time if you don't do it this way. So then after that, I use pen down to start drawing. Means I'm ready to draw the center grid, and then move through the world X center right in the middle of the x-axis, and then upper bound to the opposite from right here to the opposite direction in a straight line, creating this vertical line and the x-axis between the x-axis, and then again pen up, stop drawing, and move to the left bound or world y center, left bound and the center of the y-axis, which is this is the y-axis, the vertical line. The center is right here, and then the left bound. And then pen down, start drawing, then move to the right bound to the opposite direction, creating, I don't know if you can see, but creating this middle line right here, the x-axis. For the vertical grid, I created a loop to make things easier since this is a repetitive job. It is a great idea to use a loop if you are doing something over and over again without changing anything, or if you want to change just use a few variables at a time, but still a repetitive process. So I started out with declaring a counter, which is the I, setting it to 0, and a condition that is if the counter is still less than the grid line, or for example, if you set a grid line of 20, it'll keep on going until it passed or reached the grid line parameter that we passed in. Then this one just indicates that it keep on going and increment the counter by 1. So these are the additional variables that I set. We don't have to concern ourselves with how I came up with a formula because we don't have much time, but I set a start x position, start y position, and x position and y position. So first thing I did is pen up, of course, so we don't have to create unnecessary lines, and then move to the start x position. If I can remember, it's going to be right here, start x position, and then move up to the end or to the opposite direction, just right here, and then that's the end of the loop. And then from start position, from where it started, it's going to add up. It's the grid spacing. It's going to add up. It's going to add up to the start x position, then and also the y position, and go to the opposite direction, and then keep on going until it's completed the task, or until the grid line has been equal to the counter that we set. So for the horizontal grid, as I said earlier, we don't need to concern ourselves with the formula, how we got the formula, because we don't have much time. But I also said that it is dependent that on the amount of space that we have on our vertical grid lines. So let's say we have 20 grid lines, and the amount of space between each of those is going to determine how many horizontal lines that we have, because we need to match the grid spacing, the vertical grid spacing, with the horizontal grid spacing as well. And since we don't have the same size of our width and the height, it needs to match either way, horizontal or vertical. It needs to match the spacing between, so we can create a square, perfect square. So now that we have everything all set up, there's only one thing. The one last thing that we can do is to test our method, see if it works. So I've pre-made this code right here and created a file called canvasgrid.java and created a class for it, and also pre-made the variables and initialized the world turtle, having at 800 as the width and 600 as the height, passing in the turtle, passing in the world into the turtle parameter, and using the draw grid method that we just created with the parameters of world width, which is 800, world height 600, and the grid lines. The amount of grid of the vertical grid that we're going to have is 20. So let's run our code. Save it. I've already saved it. Save it, compile, and run. So as you can see, it actually works. We have a center grid, an even spacing on the vertical and horizontal grid. So pretty much it's success. You can use this code however you like, as it is yours. I'm going to post the code in the comment section. And that's it for this video. Hope you like it, and good luck.